I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily News for Friday, February 11th. In response to ongoing blockades in Ottawa and Windsor, Ontario, Premier Doug Ford says he is declaring a state of emergency.
I'm using my authority as Premier of Ontario to declare a state of emergency in our province. And I will convene Cabinet to use legal authorities to urgently enact orders that will make crystal clear it is illegal and punishable to block and impede the movement of goods, people, and services along critical infrastructure.
Premier Ford says that includes protecting international border crossings, 400 series highways, airports, ports, bridges, and railways. He says fines for non-compliance will be up to $100,000 and up to a year imprisonment. The Premier also told protesters in Ottawa and the Ambassador Bridge to go home.
My message to those still in Ottawa, to those at our border crossings, please go home. To those of you who have brought your children, please take them home. I urge you, it's time to leave.
Mr. Ford went on to say that the right to make a political statement does not outweigh the right of workers to make a living, to trade, and live peacefully in their own homes. All right, well, meanwhile, the federal government is under increasing pressure at home from Washington and from Michigan's governor. This to end the protest that has shut down the Ambassador Bridge between Windsor, Ontario, and Detroit. Pressure is also building for an end to the protests at the border crossings near Coutts, Alberta, Emerson, Manitoba, and the one in downtown Ottawa. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he spoke about the situation with U.S. President Joe Biden this morning. And at a press conference today, the Prime Minister said that the anti-vaccine mandate protests and border blockades must and will end. However, the disruption efforts at the Ambassador Bridge come with a hefty price tag, tens of millions of dollars a day, and they are set to escalate today. Meanwhile, the Ontario Superior Court has granted an injunction preventing protesters opposed to COVID-19 measures from blocking the Ambassador Bridge border crossing. It takes effect at 7 p.m. Yesterday, the same court granted the Ontario government's request to freeze access to millions in donations for protesters from platform Give, Send, Go. Meantime, Fredericton, New Brunswick has prepared for a protest against pandemic health measures today. The street in front of the legislature is barricaded off, and downtown schools were shut down. Police have brought in extra resources to try to keep unwanted vehicles away from the downtown area. The province adopted regulations earlier this week that could see vehicles seized, protesters hit with hefty fines, and driver's license suspensions. Back in Ottawa, the government is planning to announce changes to COVID-19 measures at the border next week, now that the worst of the latest wave of the pandemic has passed. But Health Minister Jean-Yves Duclos says Canada cannot remove measures entirely, while so many people are still dying of COVID-19. The Manitoba government is also preparing for changes, saying it will lift COVID-19 restrictions in the coming weeks. Capacity limits will end on Tuesday at indoor venues, including restaurants, casinos, museums, and sporting events. On March 1st, people will no longer need to show proof of vaccination to enter public venues. Indoor mask requirements will end on March 15th. Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Brent Rusin says the current pandemic wave has peaked and indicators show things are improving. Former Ontario Privacy Commissioner Anne Cavoukian has told the Commons Privacy Committee that she has concerns about the Public Health Agency of Canada's collection of Canadians' mobile phone data. She says she finds it disturbing the agency did not actively tell people that their data was being collected to help understand travel patterns during the pandemic. The agency says it has not and will not be able to identify or track individuals using the data, and it is now requesting approval to track phone location data until next year. New developments for Canada's long-term care sector. Experts have released a new set of draft standards and will accept feedback on them until April 11th. The standards, developed by CSA Group, formerly the Canadian Standards Association, focuses on building design, materials, and infection prevention and control. Charlottetown City Hall has raised the Pan-African flag this week. The flag was raised in honor of Black History Month. The red, black, and green flag represents the African diaspora and is flown as a symbol of Black freedom. It was created in 1920 by Jamaican activist and journalist Marcus Garvey. Stay with us. We'll be right back with a cryptocurrency update up next. Welcome back. Up next, Forum Daily's weekly cryptocurrency and digital asset update with Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here. Take it away, Catherine.
Thanks, Nima. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly crypto and digital asset update. I am Catherine Murray. Well, we have seen Bitcoin climb back above that $40,000 mark, the most we've seen in terms of percentage gains in about 4 months, up by about 10% over the past week. We've also seen Ether climb by about 12% over the past week as well. This is all on the back of improved risk appetite following Amazon's blowout numbers last Thursday, as well as blowout U.S. jobs report on Friday. It's really set a different tone in the equity markets. Not to say we're not seeing volatility. And of course, I'm bringing up equity markets because we know that cryptocurrencies have had a tighter, higher correlation with equity markets over the past year or so. So it has had an impact. And today and this week, it's been to the upside. We did see a little bit of a pullback, though, in cryptocurrencies yesterday following a high inflation reading in the United States. But nonetheless, definitely an improved sentiment towards cryptocurrencies over the past week. Now, the biggest news this week in cryptocurrencies, and probably for a very long time, if you missed it, really big news on Tuesday. The U.S. Justice Department seized $3.6 billion that was apparently linked to a 2016 hack of a Hong Kong crypto exchange. Interestingly, as well, they arrested 2 people on the back of this. Ilya Lichtenstein, who is 34 years old, and his wife, Heather Morgan, who is 31 years old. They allegedly conspired to launder the Bitcoin to the tune that is worth right now about $3.6 billion after it was hacked. Now, apparently they were not involved in the hack. Instead, they were using or took the funds and laundered the funds through setting up, this is according to the DOJ, setting up fictitious IDs and using online accounts, dispersing these stolen funds in a variety of virtual currencies, darknet markets, and then withdrawing the funds. So that's the big interesting news, I think, in the market this week. And why it's perhaps important is because they can actually follow the money through the various blockchains. So that's actually perhaps a really important aspect as it relates to the people who are so against cryptocurrencies because of the ability to hide. Well, clearly they weren't able to hide, and they were not easily, I'm sure it took a lot of work and a lot of working together to find this out. But nonetheless, it should give hope that, you know, it's cannot always be used for bad, and that the authorities can in fact find the funds, which they did. Away from that, in terms of news, interesting here, the Russian government and their central bank have reached an agreement to draft legislation to recognize cryptocurrencies as a form of exchange. That's important in terms of the development and acceptance of cryptocurrencies. We've also heard, apparently, this is according to a job post out of Microsoft, that they are looking for a head of crypto business development, someone who can help develop a vision and a roadmap for cryptocurrencies. We've also heard that South Korea's sovereign wealth fund, which manages about $200 billion, is increasing their investment in Silicon Valley companies, really looking to the metaverse as well as AI. And away from that, as we think about the Super Bowl this weekend, watch really closely for the commercials, because apparently some people are calling it Crypto Bowl. Take a look at all of the, perhaps, we'll see, I don't know yet, the crypto companies that are really trying to brand themselves during the Super Bowl. So we'll see how that plays out. Nima, that's it for me. Back to you.
Thanks for that, Catherine. I guess watching for crypto ads is a new reason to tune into the Super Bowl. All right, that was Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here. Well, meanwhile, social media meets AI in a new experiment to understand long COVID. A Toronto Tech Institute used artificial intelligence and social media to determine fatigue, pain, brain fog, anxiety, and headaches are the most common symptoms of the condition. The Vector Institute teamed up with TELUS, consulting firm Deloitte, and diagnostics and pharmaceuticals business Roche Canada. This to help healthcare professionals learn more about the symptoms that people with a long-standing form of COVID experience. They built an artificial intelligence framework that processed 460,000 Twitter posts from people with long COVID, and they completed the study in a fraction of the time it would have taken without AI. Time for an update on the Beijing Olympics, where no medals were won today from Canada, leaving it with 12, 1 gold, 4 silver, and 7 bronze. Speed skater Ted Jan Bloemen was on pace for a medal halfway through the men's 10,000-meter event before finishing 8th. Jennifer Jones lost 8-5 to Japan in women's curling, which was her first ever Olympic loss after running the table at Sochi 2014 and winning her 22 opener. Stay with us. We've got our gas update with Dan McTeague up next. Welcome back. Forum Daily's weekly energy update with Dan McTeague is up next. Dan McTeague is the senior petroleum analyst at gaswizard.ca, and he joins us now. Welcome back, Dan.
Well, thanks again for that, Nima. That was quite a week we've seen. I think it came off a little different than I had expected. It was sort of increase in energy prices delayed. I had left our last meeting with the idea that it would be about a 3 to 4 cent increase this week. It looks like a couple of factors may have interfered with that increase of oil prices. In fact, they went from $92.5 a barrel all the way down to about $88 a barrel, only to come right back up today, back to 91.5. What's really happening here is that a couple of things that analysts are looking at. One, they are nervous about the rate of inflation in the United States. But they're also looking at the possibility of the United States removing sanctions on Iran, which would allow Iran theoretically to produce more oil. Of course, we're talking about sanctions that were done because Iran very much threatened to destabilize the world with its building of nuclear facilities and fissile material. We also know that this was a week where some had assumed, and I think perhaps incorrectly so, that OPEC would suddenly be able to provide a lot more oil to the world. Of course, it continues to fall behind in that regard. And then the issue of the tensions, the geopolitical tensions between Russia and its threat to Eastern Europe seem to have fallen off the table. It's back on today with a vengeance. And I think as we get closer to the end of the Beijing Olympics, probably about a week away, we'll probably be in a far more dangerous zone, and that is likely to be extraordinarily bullish for oil prices and in turn drive up the price that we pay at the pumps, not just for gasoline, but also for diesel. Now, across the country, there are still records being broken. Newfoundland saw $1.72.9, again, 14 cents above what it had seen in November as its highest price. Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, PEI, all pushing in the $1.58, 57 range. And of course, Quebec is still holding at about $1.68 a liter. If you look here in Toronto, $1.57, $1.56 a liter. Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta from $1.43 in places like Edmonton at the high end, all the way up to $1.49 in Winnipeg. The BC interior, very expensive, depending on where you are, as much as $1.63. If I look in Kamloops very recently, prices had really risen there. Some of that due to the Trans Mountain Pipeline, not 100% back up. And of course, the fact that British Columbia has not just one, but 2 carbon taxes, the hidden one called the Clean Fuel Standard that a lot of people tend to think is just the oil companies taking advantage of consumers. Well, in fact, it's the government helping itself to green organizations that are doing very well in the carbon credit market in that province. British Columbia, its highest prices, of course, are still in Vancouver at $1.73 and $1.65 over there in Victoria. What we're looking at, Nima, over the next week or so is a market that is likely to see that surge that I had suggested of about 3 to 4 cents a liter. We are going to see a $100 a barrel oil, but it really does suggest that this is really a time where we don't normally see these prices increase as dramatically as they are. A lot of refiners are going to be going into what's called springtime maintenance, getting ready for that springtime demand, as if the demand isn't high enough. And that will mean less production. It'll mean higher prices as demand surges in this post-pandemic period. It also suggests that this is the absolute wrong time for the federal Liberal government to increase the carbon taxes and increase the burden on Canadians who are struggling through a very cold winter, especially when it comes to home heating fuel, which, as I've mentioned earlier, like gasoline, is shooting through the roof, with places like New England in the United States burning more oil to produce more electricity, burning more natural gas, as we're seeing here in Ontario, to produce electricity. All this really means is that we're heading to a time where the federal government really needs to think about a moratorium on increasing carbon taxes and do something that I did as a member of parliament, not once, but twice. Maybe rebate some of that HST, GST. Every province charges that, but as the price has gone from an average of $1.12 to $1.60, it looks like the federal and provincial governments are in for a massive windfall of several, and I say $2, perhaps $3 billion. That's money that does not belong to them. That's money that belongs to consumers. We really care about Canadians. If we really want to find our footing, perhaps remit that to Canadians and end this idea of increasing this inflationary burden on Canadians. Well, Nima, that's my report for this week. Look forward to more prices, and we're not out of this by any stretch. 2022 will continue to be very expensive for Canadians, led by no less than high prices of gasoline and diesel. We'll see you next week.
All right, thanks for that, Dan. As usual, lots to consider. That was Dan McTeague, Senior Petroleum Analyst at GasWizard.ca. Stay tuned, more news from around the world up next. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says Russia could invade Ukraine during the current Beijing Olympics. So he's urging Americans to leave the Eastern European country immediately. Mr. Blinken did not detail the reasons behind the State Department's latest security alert, but says the U.S. continues to see very troubling signs of Russian escalation. The threat of war in Ukraine and a strengthened alliance between Russia and China were on today's agenda when Mr. Blinken met with his counterparts from India, Japan, and Australia. The Pentagon says President Joe Biden has ordered 3,000 more soldiers to Poland amid urgent U.S. warnings of a possible Russian invasion of Ukraine. Staying in Europe, where spiking energy prices are raising utility bills from Poland to the United Kingdom. This is leaving people struggling to make ends meet and small businesses uncertain about how much longer they can stay afloat. In response, governments across Europe are rushing to pass aid to ease the hit as energy prices drive a record rise in inflation. Turkey has been hit hardest. Inflation has soared to nearly 50%, and high electricity bills are stirring protests and fears about how small businesses can survive. All right, turning to the ongoing fight against the Islamic State now, which one chief commander for the U.S. allied Kurdish-led force says is a growing threat. Mazloum Abdi from the Syrian Democratic Forces told the Associated Press that immediate security measures were taken to contain active IS sleeper cells. But the group is proving to be a resilient insurgency. He says, "We are surrounded by the Islamic State," in an interview on Thursday in the wake of last month's deadly prison attack. Mr. Abdi shared blame for the attack that left 121 SDF fighters dead and took nearly 2 weeks to contain. In Afghanistan, the Taliban have detained 2 foreign journalists on assignment with the UNHCR and a number of its Afghan staff in the capital of Kabul. The Geneva-based organization announced the detentions in a tweet. The agency refused to comment further. The development in Kabul comes as the White House confirms President Joe Biden will issue an executive order to unlock $7 billion in frozen Afghan assets. Moving to Burkina Faso, where the Constitutional Council says that junta leader, Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damibe, has been declared president. Military officials confirmed Friday that Mr. Damibe is to be officially inaugurated on February 16th. However, his term as president is effective retroactively from the January 24th coup. Mr. Damibe has vowed to restore security to the conflict-riddled nation, which is facing a dramatic increase in attacks by jihadis linked to al-Qaeda and the Islamic State group. The former president is still under house arrest in the capital of Ouagadougou. More countries have asked this week to join talks about the European Union's complaint with the World Trade Organization. It is accusing China of exerting economic pressure on Lithuania. Canada was the latest Thursday, saying it wanted to take part in WTO consultations. This over a dispute tied to Taiwan opening a diplomatic office in the EU member country. Canada joins the UK, Australia, and the US. Lithuania broke with diplomatic custom by agreeing that the Taiwanese office in Vilnius would bear the name Taiwan. This instead of Chinese Taipei, a term used by other countries to avoid offending Beijing. China says it's adhering to WTO rules in its dealings with Lithuania. World leaders met on France's Atlantic coast for the One Ocean Summit. They are talking about ways to protect oceans from threats such as overfishing and plastic pollution and finding fairer ways to manage the seas. 14 nations have committed to strengthen the fight against illegal fishing. This through different actions, including better controlling activities in ports and at sea. Turning to the U.S. now, where Super Bowl advertisers are hoping to deliver a dose of escapism this year with light humor and star-studded commercials. NBC quickly sold out its ad space and says an undisclosed number of 30-second spots went for $7 million, which is up from $6.5 million last year. A New York man is in a legal fight to keep a pig that he says is his emotional support animal. Wyvern Flat says Ellie, the pot-bellied pig, is family to him. But officials in his upstate village consider the pig a farm animal that Mr. Flat is harboring illegally. Their fight could go to trial next month. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily News.